You are listening to The Evolved Masculine. Whether you are wanting more and better sex, more confidence, healthier relationships, or a greater understanding of and deeper connection to your masculinity, this is the podcast for you. I am your host, Destin Garrick. Welcome, everyone. This is Destin Garrick, and you're listening to the Evolved Masculine podcast. My guest today is Michael Ellsberg. I have known Michael for 12 years, roughly, somewhere in there. And back when I was not even just still in my erotic rockstar days, like at the start of my erotic rockstar days. And I've had the incredible opportunity to grow and evolve alongside Michael as he went on to publish several highly successful books. He has built a name for himself, just as I have, and continue to explore and push the edges of these conversations, particularly around consent, how men are and relate to the Me Too movement, porn for sure. Has he dived into that conversation and then some, and we're going to be diving into those topics as well as like the notion of seduction and how is that relevant, or is it relevant in this post Me Too era that we're in now? As well as things like David Deida and the older and larger pickup world. And my book of The Evolved Masculine, Be the Man the World Needs, the One She Craves, and how these different conversations connect and overlap and butt up against one another. It's sure to be an interesting conversation because Michael Ellsberg is certainly an interesting guest. So welcome, Michael.
Thank you so much for having me. And it's a real pleasure because, as you mentioned, we both became friends at much earlier stages in our lives and development. And it's really been amazing to see your evolution and just how much devotion you put into evolving and who you are now. And I've just seen it all grow. And it's been really special for me to be on this journey supporting each other over all these years.
Thank you, Michael. Same. So we're going to do things a little bit differently today, switch things up, as Michael Ellsberg has agreed to drive this conversation and essentially be interviewing me. So we're moving between me interviewing him, interviewing me, and us just being in a dialogue and conversation as two men who are really passionate about these subject matters.
Great. Yeah, I'm excited for this format. And I also have just been so enthralled with your book. I have a lot of questions and want to relate to the audience as an early reader of the book. So hopefully some of that enthusiasm translates.
Sounds great to me.
So to start, I'd love to talk about, where have men gone for advice on how to relate to women before they had a resource such as your teachings and your book? And I think we've talked about this and we've really identified the two main areas men have gone is the pickup world, the PUA, or what was called the seduction community, which I think is kind of a misnomer, but the PUA world. And then as an alternative to that, a lot of guys turn to the kind of David Deida sort of conscious masculine world. What's your sense of that landscape, and looking back, what you think of it now, and where it's heading, and where you fit in with that?
Yeah, great question. I'm going to add in a third major cultural force, being the porn industry. Mm-hmm. Particularly at this time when I was dreaming up the erotic rock star, those three elements were kind of peaking. Mm-hmm. David Deida's book, The Way of the Superior Man, came out maybe 8 years prior, somewhere around there. And by that point, particularly in the San Francisco Bay Area where I was living at the time, it was all around me.
Oh
You
yeah.
know, I was in Burning Man and quote unquote conscious community circles where like every man had read, was reading, or was being recommended to read The Way of the Superior Man. People had different relationships to it, but it was a force. But
Absolutely.
simultaneously, arguably, the even larger force was the rise of the pickup industry. Uh, Neil Strauss's book, The Game, Penetrating the Secret Society of Pickup Artists, came out in 2005. So we're talking about a year and a half to 2 years later, and it was everywhere. It had become a massive, like, cultural force. And then on top of that, this is also just after the time here where the free porn tube sites really became a thing. And suddenly that was saturating the culture and most of our individual
Yeah.
lives.
Hmm.
So all of that was having an impact on me as I was trying to figure out, like, how, what is this man? What kind of man do I want to be? And I was deciding to do this deep dive into my own masculinity and really kind of repelled by the pickup world, while at the same time recognizing that there's got to be something going on here for so many millions of men to be drawn in this direction. What's up? And then simultaneously, like, consuming a lot of porn while at the same time feeling like there's a lot of what is out there and even that I'm consuming that's also just not in alignment with my values, but B, I am personally experiencing things sexually and erotically that, in my opinion, blow out of the water anything I've seen in porn. And so how do I kind of think of it as the erotic rockstar was my artistic and spiritual response to the porn and pickup industries. But I didn't know what I was doing. So, so I was trying to figure out and being influenced by these forces while at the same time trying to do something else, do something quote unquote better. Did
Yeah.
that address your
That
question?
yeah. That that answers it. And I think we had different trajectories around that because fortunately, and I will say looking back, fortunately, you sounds like you didn't actually go into the pickup world. You saw the problems early. And
I stood at the edges. People start coming into my coaching practice who were deep in that world, and I'm like, at first I didn't want to go near with a 10-foot pole, and just like, no, I don't want to be associated. Like, I was really afraid of being associated in any way, and I just had nothing but strong judgments. But this kept popping up in my work world, so I'm like, all right, from a professional standpoint, I need to understand what's going on over here. So I always try to do so from the outside, but I can't say that, there's that statement by Nietzsche of stare into the abyss long enough and the abyss starts to stare back into you. I
right.
do feel that it was having an impact on me as much as I didn't necessarily want it to.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I had a different trajectory in that I was deeply involved in the pickup world. Actually, before Neil Strauss even came out, I
Wow.
was like 20. I didn't really know how to relate to women. I was, desperate and horny. I wanted to learn something, and this was what was available back then. This was like the early 2000s, like 2000, 2001. And yeah, this is what men were taught and in this world, and it was huge. And now I look back at it as really problematic in terms of just the way it taught me and men to have such an agenda around women and to objectify them as kind of means to this agenda and manipulate and pressure in various ways. And I can really look back and see just all the ways it was wrong and off. And I'm really glad that there's something hopefully that's subsuming that now. And you know, if I had had a book like yours, uh, when I was that early 20 something, kind of trying to figure out how to relate to women and, you know, have the erotic encounters I was craving, I think that I would have had a different life path that would have just avoided that whole decade or so of pickup that I unfortunately went into.
Well, I think that we're already post peak pickup.
Yeah. Yeah.
That it has lost favor. I think that it was already beginning to lose favor, and then the Me Too movement came, and
Right.
I think it really lost favor.
Yeah.
Which you know, I mentioned this in my book, and you know, arguably a bit controversially, but I don't think that it is a coincidence that the pickup era directly preceded the Me Too era.
Yeah. I mean, there are obviously a lot of factors, but
Sure,
the pickup,
absolutely.
the pickup culture for sure. I mean, this is a whole tangent we don't need to go into, but the pickup culture, when I was in it, was not a politicized force. It was a bunch of horny guys who were doing stupid shit in bars and magic tricks and wearing ridiculous costumes and saying stupid canned pickup lines with routines to try to pick up women. I'm not proud of that, but it wasn't really a political movement. And since I got out of it, there's this whole history of how it morphed, starting probably around 2010. It morphed into this whole kind of manosphere, like red pill men's rights thing, where, and then kind of turned into Gamergate and 4chan, and it just got really
Dark.
really dark and right wing, and actually arguably played a role in electing Trump because of all the 4chan and the Gamergate stuff. And
Well,
yeah.
as far as I could understand it, somewhere in that time period, there was a split occurring within the quote pickup industry, in which one part of it was really evolving, was really growing, was really moving in a more personal development
Right.
direction, and in the direction closer to like what you know my work is about, at least closer. Whereas
Yeah.
with that side going that way, the other set went the other way, and
Right.
they got further and further apart from one another.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay, so talking about the evolution,
Mm.
let's now talk about the influence of David Deida. And by the way, I'll just go on the record saying, you know, I benefited from David Deida. I went to a lot of his workshops. I found it as a useful way to transition out of pickup into something more respectful for women. And personally now, it's about 20, 21 years since it's been published, The Way of the Superior Man. It reads very dated. It feels dated to me. Data feels
Dated
dated,
data, yeah.
and yeah, dated data. And I think that your book, it's a very different book from that book, but I think it will actually surpass it in playing the same kind of function that that book played for several decades for men. It's kind of the book that I think your book will be, and that book was, where men go when they're like, all right, I'm done fucking around. You know, I want to relate to women well. I'm done with the bullshit. I want to get my shit together. I want a real relationship. How do I do that? And that was what was available then. And your book just has so much more detail, and it goes into so many more angles, and it's not so abstract. You know, the Way of the Superior Man is very ethereal, and it's about these kind of abstract energies of masculine and feminine. And I feel like your book, like an average guy in a bar, you could hand it to him and he would look at it and he would see things that he could relate to and learn from.
I hope that's true. I hope that's true.
Yeah.
Because I've lived an unusual and extraordinary life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I put a lot of that in the book, but I really did my best to like connect to the universality of our experiences at the same time. It's like, look, look at that crazy guy and his
Yeah.
experiences, and
Yeah.
I can still relate to that and what's going on in my own world. That's
Yeah.
really what I hoped for, and so it can still entertain you
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
my life while
Yeah.
giving you something really valuable.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that, like, I have a lot of respect for David Deida in the sense that he's a pioneer. He's somebody whose shoulders I stand upon. There's so much of what I've done that I could could not have done or would not have done without what he did, and I grappled with his work quite a bit for a number of years on a personal level, and I came to places where I'm deeply grateful for the positive impact it left on me, and I came to places where I vehemently disagree and even would argue it left negative and harmful impacts on me that took me years to unwind.
Mm.
So my all of these things influenced how I wrote and what I expressed, because I want to do everything I can to minimize the likelihood that I'm creating harm with what I write. And of course, hopefully another 20 years from now, A, they're still talking about my book, and B, and B, some kid now comes up and offers something better,
Yeah.
offers something for those times, and that's a positive evolution on the best of what I've done.
Yeah. What do you feel when you say that it left that body of teachings had some harmful effects on you, or just didn't no longer resonate for you? Like, how would you identify those?
Well, I think more of the former than the latter. It's not necessarily that no longer resonated. The places that I feel like caused the harm never resonated.
Mm-hmm.
I tried,
Mm-hmm.
and I felt like I had a lot of self-judgment for the ways in which things weren't fitting
Mm-hmm.
before I ultimately unwound and found there's things here that I really wish that I knew then.
Mm-hmm.
Just to ground this out a little bit, one of the big places is that and there's just at least a handful of them, but one of them is there's a major emphasis on men and their masculinity being the ground, the superior
Mm-hmm.
man,
Mm-hmm.
being that anchor and ground uh, within the feminine storm,
Mm-hmm.
meaning her in her expressions can be wild in its expression in any and every direction.
Mm-hmm.
And as a man, learn to find stillness, calm, ground, be immovable,
Mm-hmm.
essentially. And there is a certain value in that, don't get me wrong. However, it does not speak to or allow space for trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact
Mm-hmm.
that we are living in a time of trauma. We, every person I know, we all carry trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Some of us have done more direct confrontation of it than most others, but women carry trauma that can be driving the type of quote unquote feminine storm that's being experienced. It's more of a trigger, an emotional trigger from past wounding and trauma. And men, we are carrying our own traumas. And here I just felt like I need to be a friggin' samurai. I need to just like be able to stand, just be able to hold it. And I did, and I cultivated that muscle quite a bit. However, what I did not understand at the time was a major reason why I was so reactive was because I had so much unhealed trauma in my system. And so far and beyond any of the intense cultivation that I did to ground myself, to practice it, to cultivate presence, what really did a lot for me was finally confronting my wounds and traumas,
Mm-hmm.
admitting that I had them and that they were deeper and impacting me far more than I knew, and then doing the hard work of addressing them and actively healing them.
Mm-hmm.
Then I found I was far more capable to hold my woman, or anyone for that matter, in the midst of whatever intense emotion that they need to express.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Amen. I totally agree and resonate with what you've said. My own experience there was I had a similar experience where I there was something, I held this up as this ideal, and everyone, I remember that period in like late to the late aughts, when like all the guys around me were like studying David Deida, and it was this thing, and it felt, I always remember this feeling of having to live up to some ideal, to some masculine ideal. And the ideal that he was presenting was a lot more positive than the traditional patriarchal ideal of masculinity. But it felt at that time like I wasn't measuring up, and I had to do all these practices and take all these workshops in order to like be a superior man or a real man. And I can see the value for people and for me at that time, but now with like a decade of hindsight past that, I mean, for me, my practice is just to become myself. And I have many aspects that feel masculine to me in my own way, and many aspects that feel very feminine, and just finding my own right mix of those and being confident in the ways that I'm actually also a very feminine being, has felt the most empowering to me, rather than trying to kind of fit into this David Deida ideal that community was putting forward.
Well, of course, that is another major difference in perspectives, or at least in ways in which they are addressed in his books. And something else I really grappled with regards to his work, despite what David puts forward. I do not believe that my great gift to the world is rooted in my masculine essence. I really found that my superpower has come from my ability and the capacity that I built to play the entire range. I have integrated my healthy feminine. I know her within me. I'm not afraid of her. I embrace her. I think I recognize and have gratitude for the value that, quote, she brings into my life and what I can express. And I know my masculine. I have claimed my masculinity. I have also confronted the wounds that I held around that part of my being. And I now have an incredible capacity to channel that masculinity, to drive forward, to be linear in approaches as needed, to be present, to be in pure consciousness, to take and ravish any and all of those parts without. I really view the work as being willing to confront the wounds that you carry around your masculinity, and the wounds that you carry around your femininity, because we all carry wounds around both of them.
Yes. Yes. Amen. That calls to mind a topic which I actually hadn't thought of getting into, but it seems very relevant to what you just said, which is that I think a lot of men, and including myself, looking back, are very scared. We're very scared of exploring our femininity because of homophobia in the society. And because we're trained from young boys, if you're sensitive, if you cry, if you're emotional, that means you're weak. That means, you're a pussy, you're a faggot. And those are like the worst things that a man can be called in our society, unfortunately, in this very homophobic society. And it, homophobic and misogynistic, because it's like the feminine is the bad part for men. And I've actually found, contrary to that.
Tell us, like, what's your experience of that in your own life path?
Yeah. Well, I do. I've really explored this quite a bit. I definitely do identify as heterosexual in that I'm not drawn to erotic explorations with men. And I would say, in a way, my heterosexuality is very queer, in the sense that, like, in the kink world, I have explored a lot of switching, a lot of gender bending play, a lot of role play, and submission, and cross-dressing and getting pegged and all these things that are coded traditionally as more feminine. And I've found that the more I'm comfortable with that, actually, I wouldn't have guessed this 10 years ago when I was in that, like, I got to be a man kind of thing. And David Deida influence, like, this is how you're a man. It's like very stoic and masculine. Personally, maybe it's just the people I roll with, but I found the more I explore that range inside of me, including the very feminine or traditionally feminine areas, actually the more that women find that appealing. They're just like, oh wow, this in this paradoxical way, it actually is seen in some ways as more masculine, in that you're not ashamed. You're like, this is who I am. I don't give a fuck what you think who I am, because this is who I am.
So I
And
have a chapter in the book on breaking free from the prison of homophobia.
yeah,
And I end that chapter with speaking to what you just said, is that we as men, so many of us grew up with these notions of all these ways in which we're not supposed to be or express, or else we will get shamed. You're gay, faggot, sissy, girly, what have you. And so over time, a lot of us men learn to kind of limit ourselves based on the fear of how we will be perceived or judged by others. I am sorry, but limiting your expression due to fear of how you will be seen or judged by others is not masculine.
Hear, hear.
Yeah. Historically, a core element of that's been ascribed to masculinity is that drive towards freedom, and that is anything but freedom.
Yeah, hear, hear. I'm so glad that you're putting this material out there, and I really think that there's an important place for what you're writing about in that chapter you just mentioned, for example, where men who identify as hetero probably aren't going to change that, but still need to interrogate the ways that homophobia is not only bad for society, but has been bad for them. And even for men who are very hetero, it's so limiting and constricting, just as you said. And what I've seen is, I'm a kind of Berkeley. I grew up in Berkeley. I live in Berkeley. I'm in this very lefty environment, and I think on the more liberal left side, there's a movement to just totally question, everything about heterosexuality and masculine and feminine and gender queer and kind of queer everything. And I support that, and I'm a part of that to a large degree. And I think the vast majority of men out there either aren't interested in that or aren't ready for that, and they want information on how to express their masculinity and their heterosexuality in a less rigid way and a more open and flowing, permeable to different influences kind of way.
Yeah, I also speak to this in that chapter, that the way in which homophobia affects us as men is only a small part of it actually has anything to do with another man's dick.
Yeah.
The vast majority of it has to do with the ways in which we have been programmed to limit our expression and what's acceptable and okay in it, what you explore and how you explore it. So I mean, Michael, you are a perfect example of this, in that you identify more hetero than I do, and you are far queerer in your gender exploration than I am. So
yeah, and there's a shade of the rainbow for everyone, and it's really about finding out your perfect mix. And this is true, of course, for all humans, but what I found now at 42 and is that the more I just find that mix that's truly me and just turn the volume up on it, not only do I feel better, but I attract the women who are into that. And if they're not into that, they're not the right women for me. One
I'm glad you
for
brought that up because
yeah,
as you're speaking of how women seem to be responding better now that you allow yourself to express in this uh, wide variety of ways, including your more feminine aspects, I think that that's what you just described is why. Because the truth is that there are plenty of women who would be repelled
yeah,
by that aspect of your
sure.
expression. They're not your women.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm sure we both had phases around this. I think you write about this, and I certainly did, where I'll just speak in my case in the pickup days, for me and for all the guys I knew in that, it was all about finding a woman. It was like a two-step. It was like you see the woman you're physically attracted to. It was all pretty much exclusively based on physical looks, which is very objectifying. And then you try to become who she wants. You know, if she wants the bad boy, you try to become the bad boy. If she wants the, you know, the smooth talker, you try to be the smooth talker. If she wants the, you know, the stoic guy, you become the stoic guy.
Mhm.
So it was all based on trying to adapt oneself to the woman, which is fucked up on so many levels. And one of the ways it's fucked up is that it's actually very counterproductive, because that's incredibly unattractive to a woman, to have a guy that's so permeable with his identity that he's just trying to like placate and please, you know, whoever's around him.
So I definitely had a version of what you just described in my own journey. While I had my judgments around the pickup community, I read Robert Greene's The Art of Seduction,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the seducer types that he lays out in there is the ideal lover.
Mm-hmm.
And I really connected to that archetype. I mean, to many of them, but that was one of the ones that I really enjoyed exploring, which was like using my incredible sensitivity that I had to really understand and feel into what this woman's fantasy was. And then I morphed into being and providing it. And
Yeah.
I have a bit of a me who I am today would not go that route.
Mm-hmm.
And there were many beautiful experiences created from that place, but they were unsustainable.
Yeah.
Because, particularly if I got into a relationship of any length, um, while I could be that version of me and it was part of me, there was so much more to me. And because initially I was expressing a very narrow type of expression based on what I thought she wanted uh, uh, of me, over I couldn't hold it up forever.
Mm-hmm.
And as she would start to see
Totally.
these other parts of me, they'd be like, "Wait, who are you?"
Yeah, exactly. It's a horrible cycle. Yeah, and it's great that that we got out of it, and that you're encouraging men to get out of that. Let's
Well, I
I
want to
want
talk to you about
oh,
porn, man. I want to
okay.
talk to you about your
We,
experience.
all
Like,
right, sure. There's one topic I think that would be good to talk about before that, and
let's
then
go.
let's do it. There's a paragraph that you wrote that I just think was absolutely brilliant, and it's something that I've
Yes, let's talk about
noticed.
that.
Yeah, I've noticed, and you know, definitely been aware of this dynamic, but I think that you just put words to it really clearly and brilliantly. So the quote is, if you're solely focused on being the driving force towards the sex, this is speaking to men, you can't build the sexual tension. This is when she becomes a gatekeeper. If she feels your desire and your push energy moving beyond where she is at, then she has one of two options. She can just let it happen before she is fully ready, or she can defend against it, push against it, move it aside, or make up an excuse and say she has to go. And then it goes on. Are you normally the one who pulls her clothes off first? Are you typically the one who progresses the sexual encounter towards intercourse? How can you entice her desire, draw her passion out while remaining immersed and present in the moment? Challenge yourself to get her to crave you. That I think that whole description of the downward spiral, where the guy has the agenda, and then the woman closes up, and then the guy pushes his agenda more and she closes up more. I've seen that play out so many times in my life and my friends' lives, and it's so problematic. So thank you for identifying that. Like, tell us more about.
I'm really glad that, I didn't know where you're going to go with this part. I'm really glad that that had an impact on you, because that little like subsection of the understanding women and the feminine part of the book, I really was trying to bring forward a paradigm that I don't really feel is in our culture, which is shifting from what we have known of men be that driving force towards sex. It's our responsibility. Go for it. Get it.
Yes.
One way or another, get
Right.
it. And she's to play gatekeeper. If she's a nice girl, then like no. Or if she's slutty, then yes. And she's playing that game of trying to figure out how much is too much, or doesn't want to be the prude, doesn't want to be the slut, and everything ends up being calculation. It's like we're caught in this mentality that came from a different era. 100 years ago, and less really, we as in men, did not get that there was such thing as the female orgasm and authentic feminine sexual desire. Women just let men. Well, they didn't let men. We know now women do have their own sexuality, their own sexual desire, their own likes and dislikes, the things that turn them on. It's time that we adjust to that understanding. It's well past time we adjust to that understanding. And I think that the Me Too movement is a great kick in the ass to do so, because it's become very clear that, what that driving force is actually can be dangerous for us as men now. Not just dangerous to her, but can be dangerous to us too. Great, evolve, adjust. What I put forward is like, I'm not super into the certain aspects of the way consent culture community drives things forward. I feel that it ignores the primal animalistic aspects of our sexuality, which is a massive part of our sexuality, and intellectualizes it entirely. Prefrontal cortex, which is a small part of what's going on in turned on states. And so while I agree that we would all benefit from increasing our capacity to speak about sex and to communicate our desires and ask for what we want, all of that. And I also want you to deepen into your body, deepen your sensitivity, deepen your capacity to know what your body is communicating to you, and from that, your capacity to be able to tune into her body and what it is communicating to you. Because her body is always communicating. It's time that we learn to listen. So back to the intention desire. So from that, it's not just, this thing that you should learn. I'm not big on shoulds. Like, I'm trying to give you like, go this path and reap the rewards. And in such a way that hopefully everybody wins such in this way. So spark her desire. She's got a desire, a capacity for desire. Great, spark the desire. Instead of focusing on how to get in there, focus on drawing out her want for you. And if you want to know how, well, then get the book.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such great and nuanced advice. And I think that you really speak to that nuance, in that I personally believe that affirmative consent, verbal consent, making sure that just knowing that you have consent before you escalate things is, I would say it's like a training wheel that is necessary in our current cultural evolution. No,
I think
in
you're
my
likely right.
experience,
I think you're likely right.
very few, this is just my experience, women would much prefer if we men intuited from their body language their desires and boundaries, and they're always communicating their desires and boundaries with their body language.
And I wanted to say that I'm not meaning to say either or,
Yeah.
but more in connection with. Um, After I had these conversations quite a bit with my editor, to be honest, while we were working on this part of the book, um, and then sometime afterwards, I was I was in a environment where I got to play like quite a bit, we'll say, and I came back to my editor and I was like, you know what, like I I am communicating and asking far more than I was even conscious of. For me, they're all blended together.
Mm-hmm.
The words are a piece of it. They're not the sole crutch.
Yeah.
And the words can be done in a way that is sensual, that is
Yeah.
sexy,
Oh,
that's part of
absolutely.
the dance and part of the game.
Yeah.
And we don't have enough models of that. So the message that too many men get is I'm supposed to basically like stop and
Right.
turn on this intellectual conversation.
Yeah.
I'm concerned about. I'm
Yeah.
concerned that creates problems.
Yeah. Which is, I think, better than not being aware of what the boundaries are, like far better. But to go in the head and like have this kind of wonky, geeky discussion about laying everything out, like what you do and don't want, getting into the verbal state and out of the body state, that's not ideal either. And I think we agree
Well,
on that. That it has to be
my other concern
yeah,
about it, my other
yeah,
concern about it is because of the rigidity of it, um, that there will be those who learn to do it as we're supposed to do it,
yeah,
and then there'll be those who are just like fuck that shit, and so don't don't have any real way forward with it.
yeah,
So that's really where I'm trying to bring forward this aspect of the messaging. Like I think that these things need to be laid out in a way that both women and men feel empowered as a result.
mm-hmm.
Both women and men feel like they're having greater experiences, sexier experiences as a result.
Absolutely. I don't believe that verbal communication has to, stop, put a halt to the eroticism, put a halt to the romance, seduction. It can actually, it can be an enhancement to it, but it's a skill. I practice affirmative consent now pretty universally, unless I'm very
So let's
familiar
break
with
that
some
down,
other word.
Michael. Can
Yeah.
break down for our audience, like what does affirmative consent mean to you?
It means, being absolutely certain that what you're about to do sexually in escalation is consensual, is what she wants. And usually that's achieved by asking, can I touch you here? Would you be into doing this? Can we move on to the bed? You can also get, I think this is a little more controversial in the like formal consent culture world, but I think you can get affirmative consent non-verbally if you're making eye contact and someone's nodding and it's very clear that the body language is a yes.
So it's more than that though, and I'm like, I agree with your statement around training wheels, and like I think we have that with a lot of different things in our culture right now, and I think that we can make certain mistakes when we lose sight of the fact that we're using stopgap methods. We're using temporary things to move in a direction of someplace. And my role, as I see it, is more of trying to highlight a possibility beyond. I don't
mm-hmm.
I don't argue against anything that you're putting forward. My work in this regards, it is primarily about attunement.
Mm-hmm.
Men historically have had horrible attunement, and oftentimes when this is spoken of, it's done with a lot of pointing fingers, blaming, shaming, and also that men just don't care.
Mm-hmm.
And while I do think that that there are men who don't care, I think that many more, it's we don't we we couldn't possibly attune to her when we're so out of tune with ourselves.
Yes.
And that's why this whole section around the sexual attunement comes in the last of the major sections of the book, after the sexual self-mastery section, which is really focused on attune to this, attune to your body, your own instrument, deepen your connection to these incredible subtleties that are available to you there, and giving the carrot always of, and in doing so, like so much pleasure and sexual possibilities open up to you. And from there, your ability to feel into and tune into what's going on in her body, possibly even greater than she is to her own, starts to open up.
Yeah. And what I think what you're talking about there is a step beyond the affirmative consent model. And what I would say is the affirmative consent model is a step beyond the old school model, which was basically, it's the man's job to escalate sexual activity, and it's the woman's job to say no.
So so as we're speaking, we're talking about different paradigms. I think this is where one of the so the affirmative consent is built off of that model. I'm saying it's time to retire that model. It's time to retire the model of it is our job to drive forward in one way or another, get to her sex.
Yes. Yeah. And that you write about in this chapter, and it's expressed in that quote I read, that the very idea of the man always escalating, having a kind of linear agenda. And you have this beautiful description of an encounter you had with a woman where you went into it just really sure that you weren't going to try to push an agenda. There was attraction there in both ways, but you weren't going into it with that.
It was more that I had, and this is one of the more explicit stories in the book. It was more that I had recently broken up with a woman who was then my fiance, and I knew I was heartbroken, and I had made a kind of internal decision that maybe I'll play with her, but I'm not going to have penetrative sex with her. It turned out to be wrong, but having made that decision, I engaged with her very differently than I had prior to that. I wasn't trying to get anywhere because I'd already made a decision that we weren't, quote, going to go there. And in the complete letting go of that destination, it created a lot of space for her desire to build and grow and build and grow.
Yeah, that is, I loved that chapter, and I've had experiences that tracked that. And I definitely at this point in my life can enjoy feeling my attraction for a woman that I'm interacting with without actually having an agenda to escalate it, and to wait to, not that she's going to necessarily like hit on me or escalate with me, but to wait, to let it simmer, to just go slower. Like I really, the older I get, the more value I see in going slower, and letting it simmer, feeling that desire, feeling the joy that can happen in each level of intimacy, and letting that linger for a date or two. And then if you want to explore more intimacy, go at it the next date. And not only is it just have more of that erotic energy that you talk a lot about in your book, but it's also it pops out of that whole paradigm where the man is the pursuer and the woman is the pursued, and it's much less likely to lead to consent violations and boundaries being crossed.
Yeah, I've realized just now that we've I'm not surprised given two people speaking that we have focused this whole conversation primarily around the sexuality part, which is not the entirety of the book.
No, there's a lot in the book for the people viewing that is all about internal to men and your purpose and getting your life together and your shit together and your career and finances,
what kind of man you want to be,
purpose and values. I just really like talking about sex. So.
Me too, quite obviously. Yeah. The dynamics between men and women are changing drastically, and there's an opportunity for us as men to rise to the occasion. I feel that too many men split off in one of two directions. Either they're the men who are angry about women's power, essentially, resentful, and want to reassert control and dominance in one form or another. And then there are men who collapse in the face of her power, are afraid of saying or doing the wrong thing, or just whatever you say, mommy, so to speak. Yeah, just really want to are afraid of being seen as one of the bad guys. So instead, they're trying to contort themselves into something that they think that she wants. And I really created the Evolved Masculine, of course, first and foremost for myself, and then ultimately to help act as a guidepost or a beacon for men who are seeking a third way, not just of what not to do or be, but what's possible, something to aspire towards, and the aspects of masculinity that we can feel good about and proud of cultivating and stepping deeper into.
Yes. On that topic, I mean, you probably talk to a wider range of men than around these topics than most people, because this is your work and this is what you teach. What patterns have you seen around how men are thinking about responding to Me Too? What's the range that you see there around men's relation?
I just named the two primary ends of that spectrum. With my work, I tend to attract more of the latter, the men who had previously tended towards collapse or being the nice guy, so to speak, the people pleaser, or what have you. And less so, but certainly happens. I also can work with or come into contact with the men who are just pissed. Or angry, or when is it or throughout particularly those couple of years, we're just waiting for this Me Too bullshit to be done. And not really understanding or being willing to accept or face the intensity of what caused the Me Too movement.
Yes.
And the realness of the epidemic of sexual trauma.
Yeah.
Which has not just magically gone away, though I do really hope that we've made some major strides and shifts in the landscape as a result of these past couple of years.
Yeah.
And yes, it's been messy. It's been messy. There is a lot of arguably justifiable anger on the part of women and other than cishet men that had to have a place to express. And that too, we're not in the same level of intensity of that anger expression now as we were a couple of years ago. And it needed to happen, and it's not just completely complete either. we're still reformulating. I just believe that what we can be doing as men is not trying to judge or fix or tell women what they should be doing differently or better, or in navigating this moment, but more of like, what can we do? How can we become better men? Not because there's something inherently wrong or bad about you or being a man, but because this is an opportunity. There's always an like I believe in being commitment to endless personal and spiritual development and growth. And there's always, whatever arises, there's an opportunity for introspection. There's an opportunity to become better. Use it, and the results are you become better. Wonderful. Let's become better together.
Yeah. 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 I think that you were talking about the kind of the men that are angry or that are reacting defensively. I mean, I remember the day or the 2 days when Me Too really broke out in about 2 years ago. It was like October 2017, and just seeing woman after woman, including a lot of women, that I was friends with on Facebook, sharing these horrific stories that my friends hadn't shared with me, and just seeing them out there. And I recognized very quickly that this was something very big. This wasn't just a fad. This wasn't just a 2-day hashtag trend. This was actually something massive, in that it was really the first time that women were in a widespread way taking space and being given space by the media and by social media to speak the truth, to talk about what's been going on for them and ways they've been harmed by men. And it's really the first time in history that women have had that space, and it's really powerful. It's really transformative. And it can be very confronting for men, because it's all of a sudden this mirror, like right up in our face, that we didn't have. And I'm not trying to have a sob story for men here, because this is really about women's suffering. There are, of course, victims of sexual violence of all genders, but Me Too is mostly focused around women. But I do want to have compassion for men living now in that patriarchy has been going on, roughly 5,000 years, and presumably all of these Me Too things have been going on, probably even worse, for thousands of years. And we're the first generation of men that are hearing an explosion about this. And I think that's really good and important and necessary. And it's a lot for a lot of guys, and a lot of guys are really overwhelmed by this. And unfortunately, some men just respond to that by completely shutting down or by getting really defensive or angry. And so
I also think that we've had the best again, it's getting better and such, but we need more role models for men on how to navigate these things. And we are figuring out. I do believe we are figuring it out. It's a little messy at times. It's a lot messy sometimes.
Yeah.
But I do see progress. I mean, even this work that I've been doing with the evolved masculine. I mean, I've been doing work with men for over a decade, and without a doubt, the past couple of years, interest in this type of work spiked.
Yes.
Spiked.
Yeah. Absolutely. Guys see, hopefully the more thoughtful guys, the more self-aware guys see there really is a problem. Things do need to change. They want this change. They just don't know how, really. And I'm really glad that you're creating a context where they can talk about it, and we can talk about it, and hold ourselves to a higher standard without getting mired in shame spirals about ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's really key.
Yeah. Speaking of shame, let's switch to a topic that is also very mired in shame for men in society. And I think this will be an interesting segment.
Are we talking about your porn?
Our porn, all porn.
Your porn, my porn. We'll talk about all the porn.
And I think this will be an interesting segment because I think we have pretty different perspectives on it. So tell us, you have a whole chapter about.
Wait, no. With this one starting on you, man.
Okay,
go
for it. Ask away.
So you have recently gone to Berlin for the Berlin Porn Festival, where you submitted an entry that you both helped produce and you are in, if I recall correctly.
Yeah.
So we have a bona fide porn star in our midst here.
Performer. I don't know if I'm a star yet.
So why? What's going on here? And tell us a bit about your relationship to porn.
Sure. There's a bunch of different threads. I started, I discovered the proverbial stack of Playboys under the bed, young. Like around 8, probably by 10, I was finding old VHS tapes in the basement and was, utterly transfixed and fascinated. And, I do absolutely think that age is far too young for someone to be encountering hardcore pornography and was, probably not healthy for me or anyone. And it's incredibly common now especially, that was VHS tapes. Shit. Now, the YouTube sites, it's a completely different situation. That said, I personally have never really had what I consider to be a problematic relationship to porn and masturbating with porn. Other people might have a different opinion of that, but for me, I grew up in a very sex positive household. There was no kind of religious shaming around sex or masturbation or porn or anything. And to me, it was just exploring things that I thought was hot and getting hot with them and having big orgasms. And so I've just been a porn fan the way some people are video game fans or other people are sports fans. But around 5 years ago or so, as I got more interested in the topics that we're talking about now, and evolving myself and evolving culture, I did really start to notice that the porn I was seeing didn't reflect my values, that it still was, very objectifying in that you're only relating to these people as bodies. You're not seeing their personalities. You're not seeing the more energetic or spiritual or artistic sides of sex. Just the mainstream porn culture has a very skeezy feeling to it around, especially I find the copy, I'm a copywriter, so I notice these things, like the way the porn is described is just so repellent to me. And it's always just, really misogynistic. Even if the porn is just like showing two people fucking, the way they describe it is like, young slut gets covered in cum. And it's skeezy, it's like, is that the only way we can talk about sex?
Destroy her pussy.
Yeah. And exactly. And it's, and so I wanted to explore, okay, are there alternatives? This is a medium. It's a huge industry. Where's the, just like Hollywood, most Hollywood stuff from my perspective is schlocky and also often very misogynistic. Where's the indie films? Where's the art house films? Where's the artistic, the art house, the alternatives? And so I started exploring that, and it turns out there's this whole little world, not too many people know about it, called feminist porn or independent indie feminist porn. They kind of overlap, where directors, producers, performers, mostly women, but some men are involved with it now, including myself, are really trying to question all these mainstream tropes and the way the industry works and the way the performers are treated and how women's pleasure is treated and the diversity of gender expression and the depictions of consent and the way that the porn may or may not educate the audience. And I just find it incredibly fascinating and exciting and cutting edge, and far from seeing porn as this this evil scourge on society. I see this segment of porn as actually possibly really having a solution to a lot of the problems that we're talking about, because it can role model new ways. Like, where else do we get role models? Like, from school teachers, so I just started making it. I found friends, lovers who were interested, tried a bunch of stuff. There was a really long learning curve on the technical aspects of making film, which is very complicated. And at a certain point, I had a few films that were good enough that I co-created. One was part of a school I took, actually, called Erotic Film School, taught by a feminist porn producer called Madison Young. And our student film got into Berlin and some other festivals. So yeah, I got very interested in being part of this little growing movement that's trying to shake up the industry from the inside out. And rather than look at all the problems in the industry from the outside and say, porn is bad, there's this saying, like, got a problem with porn, make better porn, and that's what we're trying to do. So there's this whole world of independent porn film festivals where you just see an incredible range of diverse perspectives on sexuality, diverse sexual gender expression, a lot of emphasis on education about consent and talking about sex and women's pleasure. All the orgasms are real. That's a pretty major part of feminist porn. It's based on actual pleasure, and I wanted to be a part of it. So I made several films, and my first three got into this international film festival.
Well, first of all, congratulations on that. Unbeknownst to most, I made an erotic film that was in an international erotic film festival as well, I think in 2012. Something that I'm still quite proud of, is not publicly available at this point, unfortunately, but my co-performer in it doesn't want it out right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I did write a chapter about porn within the book. My major focus with this part of my work is on embodiment.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens on screen is its own set of conversations that is very worth exploring.
Yeah.
And I commend the efforts that you're taking, and what's really required there, in my opinion, is for it to overtake, for it to become that which is currently independent to become dominant.
Mm-hmm.
If it's, as long as it's relegated to this little corner over here that most people don't even know about,
Yeah.
it's currently still limited. But a lot of things start that way, and then a shift does end up occurring. My focus within the book is that we are disconnected from our bodies.
Mm-hmm.
We're disconnected from our own sexuality,
Mm-hmm.
and particularly as men, so many of us start masturbating, especially now, to porn while living in their parents' house, and they develop patterns about how they experience their sexuality through masturbation that stay with them for years, decades, or even their whole life, that got rooted in when the primary objective was, how do I get this done quickly and quietly without getting caught?
Yes.
And with that shame and fear and guilt,
Yeah.
and like, how do we divorce ourselves from that, from those influences, and get more in touch with the body, get more in touch with, I was the type of man, of which there are many. Porn equals masturbation, masturbation equals porn.
Mm-hmm.
It was impossible to masturbate without porn. Like, what do you mean? Like, how do I get aroused?
Yeah.
And when I realized that, I knew that I needed to do something about it. That did not feel good to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like what the distinction you make in the book about erotic self-exploration versus a masturbation habit. I think that's a great distinction, and absolutely, I think that, like you said, porn and masturbation becomes this very like habitual thing, and is that all, whenever you're just doing something for years or decades the exact same way, you're not, there's a contraction around it, there's a rut, it's not expansive. And I love the information you have in there about really expanding a man's self-exploration. Yes, I think that erotic self-exploration and embodiment you talk about is so important, however porn relates to a man's masturbation. And I would say, I think a reason that most men don't do this, and I certainly didn't do it or know how to do it, ties back to an earlier conversation we had around the homophobia, is that we're trained that to be sensitive, to move our bodies in a kind of gentle, sensitive way, to explore these subtle emotional terrain is sissy or gay or whatever. And so we don't actually get a lot of access and practice to these softer sides of pleasure, which is like such a huge part of it. And so like you said, if we can't even do that with ourselves, how can we do it with a woman? So I'm really glad that you're putting that information out there.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I made a pretty strong argument for the value of male sensitivity kind of throughout the book,
Yeah.
and how everyone benefits. Your lovers benefit, and you benefit from deepening your capacity to feel.
Yeah. Yes. And so long sensitivity and masculinity have been supposed to be opposites, basically, almost antonyms. And I'm just so appreciative of your book, really for this reason. And I'll say to the readers, and to especially to guys out there, or to anybody who has a guy in your life and you want to give them something to educate, that your book, Destin, and this book really shows a way forward, I think, of integration, where we can still find, we as men can find a vision of masculinity that feels really strong and powerful and attractive, if that's what we want, but that doesn't have to cut off these huge parts of ourselves and self-amputate our sensitivity and our softer sides and our more feminine sides. And I think this isn't just another book, and it's certainly not one of those like, hey everyone, I've got a book too kind of books. I'm a serious writer. I take books really seriously, and I'm really just excited and impressed with how hard you worked on this to come up with a real, substantive, detailed, thoughtful, well-written, comprehensive guide for men in 2020 and beyond. And every man watching out there, please pick up this book right away. It's a game changer, and it's worth it.
Yeah, thank you. And if you're watching this on January 7th, I'm ethically bribing you to buy your copy today. It helps our whole getting this book out into the world process. By providing a whole series of different bonuses to you when you buy today, things that will make your experience of the book that much greater, and just like, I'm really big on providing value, and like, I do this because I care and because I believe in this work, and I believe very much in the power that they can have to transform your life individually, as well as the collective shift, and any degree, any aspect of your relationship relationship to yourself as a man, your connection to your masculinity, your sexuality, your connection to your feminine, your connection to women and the feminine externally as well. If you have anything going on in at least one of those areas, and let me tell you, I've never met a man who doesn't have something going on in at least one of those areas, there will be something of value for you here. So buy the book today and get the string of bonuses, and hopefully we'll get to know one another better through this process as well.
And where can people who want to get access to all that extra stuff you were mentioning, where do they go?
Very easy. evolvedmasculinebook.com.
evolvedmasculinebook.com. Go to it, change your life. Thank you, Destin. Thanks for your work. Thanks for this dialogue. And I really look forward to more.
Same here. Thank you so much, Mike.
Thank you for listening to the Evolved Masculine podcast. If you liked what you heard, please be sure to subscribe, give us a 5-star rating, and leave a comment to help other men discover this show and help the Evolved Masculine movement spread. It really does help. I want you to do more than simply consume content, but rather to embody a new way of being and radically transform your life for the better. Join us in the Evolved Masculine membership community, a brotherhood of men who are committed to being the best men that we can be. Crystallize a vision of your most evolved masculine self and implement the tools to take him out of the idea realm and begin embodying him now. Reprogram your sexuality and deepen your understanding of women and the feminine. Learn more and join us at evolvedmasculine.com/membership. I believe in you.
Thank you.